I remember the day I received the heirloom. I was 14, and my grandmother's trembling hands wrapped mine around a delicate silver chain, adorned with a small, intricately carved locket. My grandmother told me it was a relic of our family history, handed down through 5 generations of women who had survived war, famine, heartbreak. She said that as long as we carried it, we carried their endurance, their hopes, and their love. It was more than metal and glass. It was a piece of my grandmother's soul, and I treasured it more than anything else. By the time I was 25, I was working 2 jobs, juggling art school, and living in a cramped second-floor apartment with sagging floors and creaking pipes. My assigned roommate, Sasha, was the total opposite of me, flamboyant, reckless, with a million hair dyes on rotation. We weren't close friends, but in the beginning we shared at least a mutual tolerance that came from surviving the same outdated building. Things changed when I noticed small acts of disrespect from her. She'd use my expensive paints without asking, blast music at 3 in the morning when I had an early shift, leave the fridge door open so everything spoiled, or bring strange people over, unannounced. The little irritations mounted until the tension in our small apartment felt like an electrical storm about to break. Yet, I tried to stay civil, telling myself I'd outlast this living arrangement. I never confronted Sasha too harshly because I didn't see the point, and I always had my grandmother's locket to hold on to when I needed calm. That silver chain around my neck was my anchor. I decided to take a short break after saving for 2 years, a week-long trip to visit my cousin in another state. Sasha barely noticed me packing. She was too absorbed in flirting with some new fling that lounged in our living room. I left early that Friday morning, excited for a brief escape. The trip turned out to be exactly what I needed: laughter, good food, and some sanity away from the chaos I called home. And though I carried the locket with me daily, I took it off before bed one night and tucked it into my wallet. The next day, in an act of confused exhaustion, I placed it inside the zipper pocket of my carry-on. Sometime during my vacation, I forgot to transfer it back around my neck. Returning on a late Sunday night, I dragged my suitcase up the musty staircase, smiling at the thought of finally sleeping in my own bed. I walked in to discover scattered garbage bags, an overpowering smell of bleach, and an oddly pristine kitchen. Sasha was scrubbing countertops while wearing neon rubber gloves. She looked up. "Oh, hey, you're back," she said flatly, like I'd just come from the store instead of a week away. I did some tidying. Despite the shock of seeing Sasha engaged in actual housekeeping, I was briefly grateful. "Thanks, I guess." I lugged my suitcase to my bedroom and felt the tangible silence of the place. It took me only moments to realize something was off. My desk was tidy, the floor vacuumed, and my personal items had been rearranged. The hair on my arms prickled. Cautiously, I reached for my carry-on, unzipped the small inside pocket. Empty. The locket was gone. A frantic, churning feeling began in my stomach. I tore my carry-on apart, throwing clothes and toiletries everywhere. I checked each zipper, each pouch. Nothing. Bile rose in my throat as I thought about my grandmother, her aging face so hopeful when she passed this priceless heirloom on to me. I rushed to the living room where Sasha was still scrubbing. "Have you seen my locket?" My voice trembled, underscoring how important this was. She rolled her eyes, flicking soap suds across the counter. "You mean that broken old chain?" "I tossed it." My mind couldn't process. "What do you mean you tossed it?" She shrugged, turning back to her cleaning as if I were an annoying commercial break. "You left it out, I guess." "It was in the living room near the couch, I think. I threw away a bunch of junk this week." "Seriously, you're welcome for cleaning." I couldn't find my voice. Panic pressed in on me, like a living thing, and all I managed was a choked whisper. "Where is it now?" Sasha shrugged again, not looking up. "Gone." Dumpsters were emptied like Thursday. For a moment, the entire world went silent. There was no sound of the overhead light, no distant traffic, no hum of the radiator, just the roar of blood in my ears. She had thrown away my grandmother's heirloom unceremoniously, irreversibly, and then the floodgates opened. You had no right." My voice cracked with more emotion than I'd ever shown her. She turned her gaze on me, but there was no apology in her eyes, only annoyance. "Look," she said, pulling off her gloves. "It's just some old piece of junk. You don't need to be so dramatic. You should have put it away if it was that precious. Whatever. I felt tears pricking the corners of my eyes. But something else took root in my chest, sharper and darker than sorrow, rage. I seethed with it, swallowing the anger momentarily until the tears dried. I thought of my grandmother's gentle voice, her frail but proud posture. That locket was the embodiment of our entire lineage. And Sasha had just decided, in her arrogance, that it was worthless. I turned and stormed away, aware my fingers were shaking so violently. I couldn't hold anything. I fled to my room, locked the door, and sank onto my bed. Anger, devastation, heartbreak churned through me. I pressed my forehead against my knees, tears staining my jeans. The knowledge that the locket was irretrievable felt like a part of me had been thrown away too. I wanted revenge. More than anything, I wanted her to suffer for this betrayal. But I also wanted to be methodical. I'd never been a vengeful person before my mother raised me to see the best in people. But the best in Sasha had always been overshadowed by her narcissism. So I plotted, quietly. First, I called the dumpster company in a desperate attempt, but it was no use. That load had already gone to the landfill. I was too late. I let out a strangled cry after the call ended, and realized there was no turning back. The helplessness threatened to swallow me, but somewhere in my mind, I could hear my grandmother's advice. If you're hurt, do something about it. So I would. I'll show her what it means to throw away something priceless. That night, I began a private journal, no, not a journal, a ledger, meticulously logging every slight Sasha had inflicted and brainstorming ways to strike back. I soon realized that I didn't need to craft complicated lies. Sasha's own destructive impulses would be her undoing, if only I could aim them properly. So I started small. Each time she left food to mold in the fridge, I'd quietly toss it and leave accusatory notes from building management. She got penalized for excessive mess in the shared space. Then, when she used my paint supplies without permission, I replaced them with cheap, near-expired knockoffs that turned her hair an unfortunate shade of dull green when she tried to dye it next. She blamed the drugstore brand. I just listened sympathetically. Bit by bit, I ramped things up. I discovered how easily I could nudge her into making foolish mistakes. Sasha, you see, loved a good thrill. She'd find new ways to test the limits, partying, skipping work, flirting with dangerous men. All I had to do was feed those impulses, slip her party invites to local hotspots, intercept her mail so she'd miss rent reminders, and quietly encourage her to buy things she couldn't afford. She was a spark waiting to become wildfire. Our apartment started to unravel. Several times the electricity was nearly cut off due to Sasha's half of the bills going unpaid. She'd yell at me, accusing me of messing up payment deadlines, but I pretended ignorance. Meanwhile, I'd ensure my portion was always handled, leaving no official blame on me. All this time, I also felt pangs of guilt. Part of me was ashamed that I was stooping to these manipulations. My grandmother's memory had always been associated with kindness and resilience, not cruelty. Could I truly honor her by turning into someone she wouldn't recognize? But as soon as the guilt rose, I recalled Sasha's callous face, telling me the heirloom was gone, calling me dramatic for caring. And I pressed on. The deeper I went, the more Sasha's life spun out of control. She started missing shifts at her barista job. Her manager threatened to fire her. She fought with her boyfriend of the moment, screamed over finances in the hallway, and complained about migraines. Often, our neighbors glared at her, though not without pity. She had that sort of personality, chaotic, but in a slightly tragic way. But if I was being honest, I too was unraveling. Avenging the heirloom brought me no peace, just a restless hunger for justice. I'd grown addicted to the stealthy satisfaction of orchestrating her downfall. Guilt warred with anger. I tossed and turned at night, haunted by the memory of my grandmother's soft hand patting mine as she whispered stories from her youth. The best of me was gone, lost in my quest to settle the score. One day, though, something changed. I attended a small gallery showing at my art school, a place brimming with inspiration. There, I met Kiara, a fellow painting student with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. She admired a piece I'd done an abstract swirl of reds and golds, my attempt to capture heartbreak. I explained to her the story behind the painting, skipping the details of Sasha but admitting it was about losing something irreplaceable. Ciara listened patiently, her gaze never leaving mine. We bonded over our mutual love of bold brushstrokes and moody color palettes, and soon we were exchanging phone numbers, meeting for coffee, talking late into the night about family, heartbreak, and the art we wanted to leave behind in the world. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I was finding someone who offered me genuine compassion, something I'd deprived myself of since my grandmother's passing and the loss of her locket. Each meeting with Ciara released a bit of the tension that had been coiled inside me, giving me glimpses of a life not consumed by the need for revenge. But Sasha was still in the picture, loud and ever-present. She was hemorrhaging money, behind on rent, and I knew eviction loomed. The landlord began giving us final notices, forced to chase down Sasha. But I always paid my half, so I was safe. Sasha was on the brink of being kicked out. I could smell the final strike approaching. Then one evening, I came home to a bizarre sight. The front door hung slightly open, the chain lock broken. My heart hammered as I pushed inside. The living room looked ransacked. Papers scattered, couch cushions tossed aside. My bedroom door, though, was locked. I'd taken to locking it after Sasha's initial violation. I heard movement from inside Sasha's room. Carefully, I grabbed a baseball bat from the coat closet, kept there for emergencies, and crept toward the sound. "Sasha?" I called, but got no reply. My pulse pounded in my ears. I nudged her door open gently with the bat. It was Sasha, alone, rummaging through her dresser drawers like a wild animal. She was shaking, tears streaking her mascara. She looked up at me in fear and desperation. Then relief crossed her features, though she let out a ragged sob. "I was robbed," she gasped. "My boyfriend. Ex-boyfriend. He and his friends came here looking for money, something about I owe them. They trashed the place when I couldn't pay. I can't fix this." Another sob racked her frame. "They said they might come back if I don't get their money. I don't know what to do." "I'm so scared," anger surged. "What money do you owe them? Why are they coming here?" She shook her head. "I borrowed some cash to pay off my credit card bills and rent. Then I got behind again. I guess they want interest or something. I'm so messed up. Please help me." She reached out, voice cracking as she pleaded. This was the moment I'd yearned for, seeing her on her knees, powerless, after all the emotional carnage she'd caused me. But to my surprise, looking at her trembling figure, tears in her eyes. The rage in my chest dissipated, replaced by a hollow sadness. She was so pitiful, so broken by her own choices. I lowered the bat. My voice came out strangely soft. "Sasha, I can't help you. Don't you see what you've done?" She froze, tears still running. "I know I've been a jerk, but I can change. If you just loan me a little money." Her eyes flicked to my wallet on the kitchen table, desperation plain on her face. My throat tightened, and I shook my head. "You threw away something that meant the world to me. You dismissed my feelings. For months, you've made my life hell with your irresponsibility. And now you want me to fix the mess you made?" She looked so small in that moment. "Please." She reached out, but I stepped away. I recalled my ledger of petty revenges, the manipulations. Guilt surged in my gut. I had tried so hard to ruin her. But looking at her, I realized she hardly needed me to push her off the edge. She'd been self-sabotaging all along. My actions were just an accelerant to an inevitable fire. "I'm sorry," was all I said, my voice resigned. With that, I turned and walked away, ignoring her cries. It was a refusal as much for me as for her, a refusal to continue this cycle of anger and revenge that was corroding my spirit. I heard her sobbing in the hallway as I locked myself in my room, my heart pounding in my chest. The final blow had been delivered, not by me, but by her own recklessness. In the following days, the landlord had no choice but to evict Sasha. She packed up what little she had left, presumably to couch surf with friends. The tension that had once seized our apartment dissipated, leaving behind an eerie silence. I stood in the living room after she left, surveying the emptiness. For a moment, I was numb. Then I wept. I pressed my face into my hands and let out all the anguish of losing my heirloom, of how the longing for revenge had twisted me, how deeply I wished for one final chance to hold that silver chain. All my suppressed pain erupted in sobs that echoed off the bare walls. When I felt spent, I realized that staying in this apartment held no warmth for me anymore. It was tainted by memories of betrayal and vengeance. So I gave my own notice, packed my belongings, and found a tiny studio loft closer to campus. It was cramped, but it had wonderful sunlight and a sense of possibility. I hung my paintings on the walls, letting them speak of heartbreak, resilience, and slow healing. Ciara helped me move in. Seeing her that day, in her paint-splattered jeans, hair tied back, I felt something shift inside my chest, an emotion that was altogether softer. She carefully examined my art and offered praise, sometimes pointing out details I hadn't seen myself. We shared quiet laughter as we repositioned a small bookshelf and arranged my beloved art supplies in neat rows. That evening, sitting cross-legged on my new rug with Ciara, sharing Chinese takeout, I finally allowed myself to open up about everything the heirloom, Sasha's betrayal, and the elaborate revenge I had orchestrated. I expected Ciara's face to register shock or even disgust, but she listened intently. When I finished, she put down her chopsticks and took my hand gently. "That must have been heavy," she said softly. "I'm sorry you went through that." I swallowed. I feel like I dishonored my grandmother's memory by stooping to those tactics. "I feel lost." Ciara looked thoughtful. "I don't think you dishonored your grandmother. Sometimes grief and anger drive us to dark places, but that doesn't erase your love for her or the good you still hold in your heart. You just got lost for a while." I squeezed Ciara's hand, my eyes wet. Somehow, her words gave me permission to forgive myself. My heart still ached for that silver locket, but I realized for the first time that I could carry my grandmother's spirit in me, even without the physical token. Emboldened by that thought, I found myself gradually returning to a sense of purpose. I immersed myself in painting again this time. I allowed the complexities of my emotions to pour onto the canvas. Loneliness, anger, regret, sadness, and that sliver of newfound hope intertwined in swirling colors. A few weeks after I moved, I saw Sasha for the last time. I was downtown, walking with Ciara, when I spotted her across the street. She was leaning against a storefront, arms crossed, looking worn out. She saw me, froze, and then gave a half-hearted wave. I could have ignored her, but something in me needed closure, so I approached, Ciara hovering a few steps behind me. Up close, Sasha looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair limp and unwashed. She attempted a smile. "Hey," she said weakly. "So, you doing okay?" I nodded, not sure what else to say. I moved. I offered eventually. "Yeah." Heard from the landlord. Her eyes darted to Ciara. "You found a new friend." The words were devoid of their usual malice. There was only a hint of sadness, maybe envy. I didn't know what I expected from this conversation. Maybe a thank you for not pressing charges for the break-in, or maybe an apology for the locket. But she said nothing about it. Perhaps she didn't even remember the magnitude of what she'd done. My chest felt tight, disappointed. "Are you?" I began quietly. "Are you okay? Safe?" She barked a humorless laugh. "I'm alive. Probably going to crash at my sister's place for a while. I just need time to figure things out, I guess." I nodded. We stood there, awkward, both recalling the havoc we'd wreaked on each other's lives. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and looked at me, eyes shining with something like regret. I wish I hadn't done what I did. I realized that might be the closest thing to an apology she could muster. It wasn't enough, not for the locket, but it was something. I forced a small nod. "I know," was all I said. She gave me that wounded look again, like a lost child, then turned and walked away. I exhaled heavily, feeling an unexpected hint of relief. That chapter was closed. I continued living in my new studio, painting, working, and finding companionship in Ciara. We studied together and eventually began to date. She introduced me to her parents, who welcomed me warmly and told stories around their dinner table that made me laugh until my ribs ached. For the first time in my life since my grandmother's passing, I felt like I'd discovered a pocket of true belonging. In the months that followed, I grew bolder in my artistic style and allowed myself to delve into the rawness of my grief. One morning, as Ciara and I prepared for a local art exhibit, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination coursing through me. I missed my grandmother fiercely that day. A piece of me would always mourn the loss of the heirloom, but as I looked into the mirror before leaving, I saw a different woman than the one who had once cowered under Sasha's disregard. I saw someone who had finally learned to stand tall, to not let darkness define her life. The opening night of the exhibit was a whirlwind. My artwork garnered kind remarks, and I could see people resonating with the emotions laid bare on the canvas. It was therapeutic, watching strangers find parts of their own stories in the splashes of paint I'd poured my soul into. At one point during the show, Kiara slipped her hand into mine and guided me to a small side alcove. She reached into her pocket, producing a thin chain with a tiny, simple pendant. It wasn't anything like my grandmother's ornate locket, but it was beautiful in its own way, delicate, understated, and shimmering under the gallery lights. "I know it doesn't replace what you lost," Ciara murmured, eyes shining with warmth. "But I thought maybe you'd wear this, knowing it represents our shared strength, your grandmother's legacy, and a reminder that your spirit can't be thrown away. Not by anyone." Tears welled up in my eyes. I allowed her to fasten it around my neck, my hands trembling at her tenderness. A soft weight rested against my sternum, a new symbol of resilience. I pressed my fingers to it, feeling a calm that I'd feared would never return. In that moment, I felt a wave of catharsis. The power I'd sought through orchestrated revenge ultimately resided not in making Sasha suffer, but in freeing myself, freeing my heart from the cycle of hatred that threatened to poison me. Yes, Sasha had paid dearly through the natural consequences of her own chaos, sped along by my manipulations, and she'd lost just about everything. But I had regained something even more vital, a true sense of self, the start of forgiveness, and genuine companionship with a person who cared for me. I thought I would always be shackled by the memory of the stolen heirloom. But as my grandmother often used to say, heirlooms are just vessels for the memories we cherish, and those memories can live on if we let them. In that quiet corner of the gallery, surrounded by the hum of chatter and the perfume of fresh paint, I finally let the heartbreak find peace. Nothing could change what had happened. My grandmother's locket was gone, forever. But the spirit of all the women who had carried it before me was here, inside my heart, reflected in every breath I took, every brushstroke I pressed onto canvas. I may have made mistakes in seeking revenge, but I had emerged from it stronger and more compassionate, determined never to let bitterness define me. I left the gallery that night with Ciara's hand clasped firmly in mine, my new pendant glinting softly in the moonlight. For the first time, I felt my chest expand in a deep, grateful breath. I'd found my resolution, my catharsis. At long last, I walked away from vengeance and into a future shaped by hope, love, and the enduring legacy of the women who came before me.